Good afternoon, my dear friends. As you all know, we have been reading together the poems of Kamala Das. This is basically a session for the students of PG Semester 4, Department of English, University of Gurbango. We are reading together Kamala Das's selected poems. The poems are 5 in number. The Descendants, The Old Playhouse, The Dance of the Eunuchs, Very Pure Peril, Insanity, and The Millionaires at Marine Drive. And actually the paper from which these poems are being discussed today, actually the paper title is Gender and Literature. So obviously the poems that we have chosen to be covered in this particular paper must have something to do with gender and sexuality. And we have already discussed the poems separately and together. We have also given an introduction to Indian English poetry in general and to Kamala Das in particular. In my previous lecture, in my previous discussion, I had dealt with 4 particular discussion topics. And I propose to cover 4 other discussion topics one by one in course of this discussion today. Now, by way of recapitulation, let me tell you the topics are Kamala Das's use of allusion in her poems, then Kamala Das's use of images in her poems, Kamala Das's presentation of the self-society encounter in her poetry, with special reference to the poems on your syllabus, obviously. And last but not least, a kind of a close reading of the poem, The Dance of the Eunuchs. So let me start today's proceedings by discussing the first topic that I will take up today, that is Kamala Das's use of allusion in her poems, selected for your study. Now, what is allusion? Etymologically, the word allusion comes from the late Latin word alluso, A-L-L-U-S-I-O. The N is missing here, obviously. That is the late Latin word. It is a game. It's a play on the words. And in fact, this late Latin word is a derivative of the word, the Latin word, alludere, to make a jest or to make fun, to play a jest or make fun of something or someone. So, what I want to point out is that allusion has got an element of playfulness in it. Now, what is allusion? Allusion means a reference. Reference to what? Usually, in poetry, in literature, in works of art, we refer to other works of art, we refer to people, places, events, historical as well as mythological. Why do we do this? We do this for 2 reasons. Number 1, it has got a significational dimension. What do I mean? I mean, it sometimes tries to connote, tries to put across certain things that have not been explained but only referred to. But those readers, those critics, or those students who will be acquainted with, aware of the various cultural signification, the cultural significance of these slight reference to extra-textual things will make sense of something between the lines. So, reading process will be more complete and more enjoyable. And the readers will also take part in the construction of the ambit of meaning. Similarly, there is, as I have already pointed out, a playful aspect to it. So as if the critic is being challenged, the reader is being challenged by the writer to make sense of certain other things. For example, you have all read The Wasteland. Now, one of my students had once said, The Wasteland has two epigraphs. We have read those epigraphs. But there is also another implicit epigraph that is not given, but that is implied. What is that? Eliot seems to say, I have read everything, I have understood everything. If you doubt my veracity, read this. So obviously, there is a playful, tongue-in-cheek intention of the writer who plays with, makes fun of the reader or the critic. But at the same time, I was actually, while preparing for this lecture, I was reading something, and I came across this allusion to the Pandora's box. Suppose in a poem you come across this allusion, the Pandora's box. Obviously, those in the know will understand that this refers to the Greek myth of Pandora. Pandora was given a box and she was told not to open it. But she became very curious and opened the box, and many evil things came out. And when Pandora understood the real ramification of her mistake, she shut the box. That's why not all the evil of the box were let loose on this world. But whatever was let loose, we are having to face the consequences thereof, like Corona, like Amphan, and so on and so forth. So, in order to make sense of the use of allusion by any poet, any writer, you have to understand another thing, that it is a part of intertextuality. The intertextual baggage associated with a work of art. Intertextuality means the influence of one text on other, or many texts on other, one text, or one text on many texts. Now, how does the writer show the influence of one text on other? By using allusion, by using parody and pastiche as well. These two terms are from the postmodern vocabulary and jargon. Parody means actually making fun of something. Pastiche can also allude to things, but in the case of pastiche, the fun aspect, the mocking aspect is absent. It is often respectful The reference that is made is often respectful. And that is why we see that often poets use self-pastiche. They refer to their own poems, their own writings. Kamala Das, for example, often refers to other poems directly or indirectly, alludes to them. And it qualifies as the use of pastiche. T.S. Eliot has also made ample use of pastiche in his poetry. Sometimes it is self-pastiche as well. Now, film studies often use another related term, that is allusionism. And we can borrow that term from film studies in order to make sense of literature as well. Allusionism is the process and the project of alluding to, often very consciously as well, alluding to other films, other texts, even literary texts, media texts. Why? In order to make comments, in order to pass judgments, in order to establish connections to art on the one hand and to reality on the other. So after this kind of a general discussion, let us look at the poems of Kamala Das and see how Kamala Das's poems refer or rather make use of allusions, and why. Let us take up one poem after another. Obviously, my predominant and the most pressing concern will be to deal with the poems on the syllabus first. And in the passing, I may also refer to other poems that also use allusion. Okay, the Descendants. You see, the Descendants, the title itself is a kind of a generic allusion to the trajectory of descent of man in general and descent of women in particular. Now these descendants, because the poet uses first person plural number to designate the speaker, obviously we and us construct the speakerly presence in this poem. So we are the descendants of this. That means the women like Kamala Das and her ilk, they are the descendants. Descendants of whom? They are descendants of rebellious female figures like Lilith, Old Testament of the Bible, or Ahalya in the Indian Hindu mythology, and then so on and so forth. They are also descendants of prophets, of spiritual gurus, of messiahs like Lord Buddha, Jesus Christ, Zarathustra, and so on and so forth. There is an allusion to the cross in the negative. But obviously, even if it is negated, the allusion to crucifixion is there for everyone to understand. Okay, I think I am coming loud and clear, so we can go on in spite of background noise. Well, you see, Can you give me to 1 minute or 2 minutes, and I will shut the window and come back. I'm back. I hope I am coming loud and clear to you. Okay. See, uh, because the woman talks about being redeemed or made new, obviously the reference is to resurrection. The reference is also to the partial treatment, the raw deal that society gives to women, oftentimes. Okay, let's go to the next poem, that is The Old Playhouse. You know, in Macbeth, Shakespeare alludes to human life and compares it with the spell of acting that a stage actor is permitted to. Obviously, the playhouse metaphor is there for all to see. Similarly, there is also an indirect reference to Ibsen's play, The Doll's House, because there is also a reference to the marital hell that this woman speaker is having to endure. The allusion to the magic loaf, some kind of magic that can transform, that has got a diminutive effect, is also there. And there is also a reference to Narcissus, the Greek mythical figure who is associated with self-love. Now, if we go to the next poem, the next poem is The Dance of the Eunuchs. We all know that in mythology, the eunuchs have often been vilified. They have been separated as people who had a past, and usually an unsavory past. So they have been marginalized in society, in mythology. We can very easily, even in history, we can allude to, we can think about, and obviously the poet is also alluding to, either consciously or unconsciously, to Shikhandi from the Mahabharata, who actually became the cause for the death of Bhishma. Similarly, there is Malik Kafur, you know, the brutal general of Alauddin Khilji, who was also a cruel eunuch. So obviously, this allusion is also something that only a literate and initiated audience or readership will understand. There is allusion to the fiery Gulmohar. Now here, allusion, you have to understand, works culturally. based on the culture that the artwork is a product of. Now, Kamala Das was writing from Kerala. In Kerala, there is a sizable Christian population, St. Thomas Christians, for whom the Gulmohar has got a very, very important Christian significance. According to their belief, the Gulmohar was the plant beside which Christ was crucified, and Christ's blood fell on the Gulmohar flower. And that's why there is this flaming color to the flowers. And that is why Kamala Das also talks about the fiery Gulmohar, as if the Gulmohar tree is on fire because of the red flowers. So, why is she using such allusions? In order to build up a right atmosphere for the dance of the eunuchs, which celebrates the birth of a child that they cannot have, but at the same time, in an indirect manner, highlights the fact that these subaltern groups are socially marginalized, and they are also physically incapacitated from having children. Now, obviously, the green tattoos are also indicative of the fact that the skin of these eunuchs, their skin has been exposed to the sun, because it is only then in the Indian context that the tattoos become green. Okay. In the puerperal insanity, obviously the allusion is to a mental condition. Puerperal insanity is a disease. And there is a very skillful reference to, allusion to the forked-tailed drongos, some kind of long-billed, long-legged birds who are fiercely protective of their territory, but at the same time have a thieving propensity to devour the young in the nest of other birds. There is also allusion to the barbed wire fences. We all know that Kamala Das had lived through the partition. So, the brutality of borders and boundaries is something that she was quite aware of. And so far as the other poem is concerned, the Millionaires at Marine Drive, there is also a reference to the allusion to arson attacks. Now, if we read together these two poems, the sinister blooms referred to in the poem, the puerperal insanity, and this poem, the reference to arson, obviously, the violent aspect of the sexual intercourse from the male perspective, how the male brutalize the female body, that is also referred to. So, if you are required to tackle this issue, the use of allusions in Kamala Das's poems, you will have to talk about the importance and the definition of allusion and allusionism, and how allusion operates in art, in poetry. And then we will have to discuss Kamala Das's use of allusions in her poetry with adequate reference to the poems on your syllabus. How long have we taken, Nirupam? 26 minutes. Okay. Just one sec. See, there was a power cut. So the interruption is regretted. Well, the next discussion topic that I am going to tackle is a close reading of the Dance of the Eunuchs. Since I have already discussed the poem and it has been uploaded in my YouTube channel, which you can subscribe if you like it. You know, I will just refer to this topic in the passing, because I have already talked about certain aspects of the poem. I will just tell you something about what to concentrate on in your discussion of this poem. Obviously, the dance and its symbolic significance you have to understand. But how, in the case of the eunuchs, this dance is not indicative of their joyous mood, but indicative of their compulsion. They dance till they bled. This you will have to point out. Similarly, how Kamala Das, by using the heat of the summer month, by using the dried up, purged landscape, how the poet actually creates a fit atmosphere for the dance of the eunuchs. You'll have to point out. Similarly, the description of the dance should be discussed. How the dance has been described and how its import has been represented. How there is a direct or indirect reference to the wasteland-like landscape. You have to point out where thunder and lightning does not augur the usher in a replenishing rainfall, but only a meager rain that smells of dust in attic rooms or the urine of lizard and mice. So these are things that we will have to understand, because only when we understand these things can we make sense of them for others. Okay. So far as the images used in this poem, the fire image in the fiery Gulmohar, the image of drought, barrenness, you have to understand and you have to discuss. Similarly, the harsh voice of the eunuchs that the poet has pointed out, you'll have to incorporate in your response to this. Okay, let's go to the another topic for our discussion. Obviously, Kamala Das's use of imagery in her poetry will have to be discussed. Now, what is an image? Image is a reflection of an object or a human being or an animal. But in the case of literature, when we talk about imagery, because it is when you write something, you don't paint a picture of it. Obviously, you use word or word clusters, words in short, in order to paint a pen picture of what you want to describe. So obviously, the principle at work is that of proximation. You want to evoke a presence in absence. Now, so far as Kamala Das's use of images in her poetry, because I have already discussed these poems, you can very easily understand. In the Descendants, there is, and you will see a use of quite a number of images. Sometimes the images are ocular. Sometimes, for example, no God will show his wound to us, showing the wound. Obviously, the allusion is to Jesus Christ. Similarly, no God lost in silence will begin to speak. Obviously, it is an auditory image, an allusion to Zarathustra. Okay. So all these things are there. In the old playhouse, again, the images are many and varied. There are also olfactory images. The smell of breath, the smell of human sweat, all these things are there. Similarly, eating the magic loaf. Obviously, there is a gustatory image, related to taste. Bitter sweet juices, obviously related to taste. And there are elemental images also. We all know the elements are 4 in number so far as the Western conception is concerned, fire, air, earth, and water, all these things have been referred to. And you think about the ruder bridges, you think about the other homes, other bridges. Obviously, the wind, the air is also different. Now, similarly, in the millionaires at Marine Drive, there is the image of the early rising doves being fed by the millionaires. There is also the image of the arsonist groping under the clothes of the one figure and burning her city down. Almost a military image, coming from siege warfare, burning the city down, sacking the city after a siege. Okay. Similarly, as I have already pointed out in this poem, The Dance of the Eunuchs, images have been used not in a very sparing way. And there is also, kinesthetic images, related to movement, the white skirts going round and round. Similarly, the reference to the cymbals richly clashing, the flashing eyes of the eunuchs, the green tattoos and the jasmines in their hair. All these have been referred to. Obviously, the purpose of the poet is to create or to draw a pen picture of the atmosphere, of the situation, of the dance of the eunuchs. In a peripural insanity, there is reference to the jungle, to the drongos, to the doctors, to the husband figure. They are all conspiring in silence, shaking each other's hands. There are also reference to the counter strategy of the woman figure. Reference to the totem knobs, to the barbed wire fences, and obviously these paint images. In the millionaires at Marine Drive again, as I have pointed out, there are images. So if you are required to tackle this issue, you will have to define and characterize imagery in literature, how images are used. You will have to classify images, the sensory images on the one hand and the elemental images on the other. Similarly, how there is also use of symbolic images, you have to point out. When images acquire the form and stature of leitmotifs, they become symbolic images. They recur throughout our writer's aura, works. That is what Kamala has also done. In a poem such as The Millionaires at Marine Drive, for example, there is reference to the autumn leaves, the premature aging of the woman persona who passes out on the velvet couch of life. And she also refers to a freedom that she never wanted. Obviously, here the reference is to another poem that is not on your syllabus, but that is composition. Okay. So, how long have we spent discussing certain topics? Nirupam? So, obviously, we have some time left. So, the last discussion topic that I am going to tackle today will be the presentation of the self-society encounter in Kamala Das's poetry. The first thing that we have to understand is that Kamala Das has often been called a confessional poet because there is apparently too much of herself in the poetry that she writes. The poems, according to many critics, are strongly autobiographical. The image of a living, loving, breathing, and cursing woman is presented in and through the poetry. That is the common verdict of both categorizers and critics. They often very conveniently ignore the fact that poets often use specific persona to tackle specific poetic situations or artistic situations that they want to tackle in a particular work of art. The entire dramatic nature of Kamala Das's poetry is forgotten by such critics. Self is there. Nobody can deny this. But there is also society. There are others. The Dalits, the eunuchs, the poor field hands, house builders, whores like Yovan, um, there are Hindus and Muslims, there are Sikhs and Nirankaris, there are Tamils and Sinhala. So obviously, the poet is not each one of them, but in some ways, because she can empathize with each one of the characters or figures that she describes in her poetry, she can very effectively represent society. Those sections of society that she found being vilified, being marginalized, and also being segregated for one reason or another. The presence and the effect of marginality and marginalization in society that Kamala Das inhabited and described often appear and operated in and through her poetic narrative. And that is something that we need to understand. Yes, being a woman poet, Kamala Das often spoke from the perspective of the woman. For example, in these 5 poems, let us think. In The Descendants, for example, in The Old Playhouse, in Pure Peril Insanity, and in The Millionaires at Marine Drive, the speaker is a particular woman or womankind in general. But we are not sure as to the gender identity of the speaker in one a poem like The Dance of the Eunuchs. Now, in all these poems, we will see in The Descendants, there are the sinning and sinned against women on the one hand, and a host of male sexual partners and prophets. There is an encounter. There is a discursive dialogue between the two. In The Old Playhouse, there is the woman persona and the husband figure. In The Dance of the Eunuchs, there are the eunuchs in the foreground and the parents and young boys, wide-eyed, who remain in the background. Similarly, in the Millionaires at Marine Drive, there is female bonding between the now dead grandmother and the erring and suffering woman figure, woman persona. And there are also the male, the thieving hands, the brown thieving hands, metonymically representing male lovers and male concupiscence, for that matter. Similarly, in a poem such as Pure Peril Insanity, the husband figure and his accomplice, the doctors, are there. The apparent conspirators. And there is also a resistant position created by the resisting mother figure, that is the woman persona, and her newborn infant. As if in and through the infant, the mother figure, the woman figure, finds some kind of a collaborator whom she could trust, with whom she could conspire, and for whom she could resist the imposing machinations of patriarchy as operated in and through both the husband figure and the doctors. This constitutes the dialogic in Kamala Das's poetry. We will always see how, in the old playhouse, for example, it is the woman who has to do the chores. Why? In order to be called the wife, in order to be given a room. So it was some kind of a financial compulsion that the woman had, along with the physical desire of a normal desiring female subject. It was not to gain knowledge of another woman that I came to you. I came to you to learn to grow and know myself. That is what she wants to do. So obviously, she also had expectations out of the marriage. But ultimately, she is tamed like a swallow. And when the male figure pours the bittersweet juices and covers all the nooks and crannies of her body and being by giving love through little doses, the woman is tamed and held in the long summer of the husband's love. And when that love begins to fall, when the passion begins to sag, when marriage begins to look terrible, drab, tedious, that the woman figure wants to at least get a freedom that is very hard to get in a patriarchal setup. So in all cases, we will see that the self-society encounter is not only present in the poetic narrative of Kamala Das. It gives the tension and triumph to Kamala Das's poetic narrative. And this constitutes the appeal of Kamala Das's poetry. So today, by discussing the 4 topics, I have tried to throw light on various aspects of Kamala Das's poetic art. So if you have any queries or questions, my dear friends, you are not only permitted, but also requested to put forward those barbed wire shafts. Any question?